Former President Jacob Zuma has been indicted on 18 counts of corruption, money laundering and fraud. Thint Holdings South Africa Pty Limited is also going to be in the dock.
Well, the National Prosecuting Authority will call more than 200 witnesses, we learnt today, some from outside the country, coming as far as from New Zealand, Australia and France. Locally, whistleblower, now Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille is on that list. We'll be speaking to her. Ayob, Ismail, Mahomed, former KwaZulu-Natal DA leader Roger Burrows, and a policeman from Mauritius. All right, as has already been reported, that list has been drawn up, and arms deal critic Terry Crawford-Browne, of course, has been hailed and criticised for his attempts to expose corruption in this arms deal. Remember, he went to court to try and force then President Jacob Zuma to institute a commission of inquiry. Later, he went to court after the SABC commission found no evidence of corruption, trying to set that aside. Well, we have him with us from our Cape Town studio, Terry Crawford-Browne. Thank you for being with us. You have been wanting for decades, not just for years, for the dirty laundry to be aired, for it to be exposed. Are you happy tonight, sir?
Good evening. Thank you for interviewing me. Yes, I'm very pleased it's finally coming to a head. It's been a long, long saga of over 20 years. And really, it has thwarted our transition from apartheid to constitutional democracy. It's really been a disgraceful saga with cover-ups and cover-ups both here and internationally. So I'm delighted that finally something is coming to a head. I have seen some of the names of the 207 people named as potential witnesses. It seems an awful lot of witnesses, and I just hope this isn't an attempt to drag this thing out like the SABC Commission so that the public loses interest in it.
Your name not on the witness list. Can you confirm that for us?
It's not on the list as I've seen, yeah.
You've spoken about massive fraud in the arms deal. Some would say there's been even more massive fraud since then. Do you believe it's still important for us as a country to look back at what happened?
Yes, I've said many times that the arms deal is what unleashed the culture of corruption. So we've got to nip the origins of it. Now, 20 years later, we've been talking about the Russian nuclear power program, which would have made the arms deal look like petty cash. But it was the arms deal that unleashed it, and there are many, many things that were interrelated with the arms deal, such as toll roads and oil deals and money laundering of various descriptions. And the common denominator, it was alleged, was kickbacks to the ANC in return for political protection. So it's been a long saga that has sadly really destroyed the checks and balances of our constitutional democracy.
On one hand, Shabir Sheikh was convicted, the court accepting evidence that bribes were paid to Jacob Zuma. On the other hand, the SABC Commission came and went, finding no evidence. Your court attempts to have that set aside failed. What makes you confident that this time the type of evidence that you've looked at in the past is enough to nail down what happened and to convict Jacob Zuma?
Well, I hope the climate is changing, that the government and the prosecuting authority have learned the lesson that cover-ups and cover-ups over 20 years have only compounded the problem. Had they dealt with this in 1998-99 when it first occurred, we wouldn't be suffering the consequences of the culture of corruption that we have now. They thought they could cover it up, and they only compounded the problem. So I hope they've learned that lesson and they don't have a repeat of the SABC Commission.
Given his age, Jacob Zuma unlikely to face jail time anyway. Is it still worth it?
It is, yes. And I must say that, delighted as I am that the charges are now being pressed against him, I have also said many times that he was a small fish in this saga. There are much bigger names both here and overseas. The case on which he's being indicted relates to a subcontract for the arms deal connected with the French. But the Germans supplied the frigates and the submarines, and the British and the Swedes supplied the warplanes. The corruption there was enormous. BAE has been hauled into, has been plea bargaining fines in the United States for corruption. The British government squelched an investigation in London saying it threatened British national security. In 1998, when I learned that BAE was laundering bribes via 2 Swedish trade unions, I got confirmation in Sweden but got no further. So I asked the British government to investigate whether BAE was laundering bribes to the ANC ahead of the 1999 election. Scotland Yard was appointed. It came back it was not illegal in English law to bribe foreigners, and therefore there was no crime for Scotland Yard to investigate. Roll on until 2010, Swedish TV4 took up the issue and found that the man who had actually facilitated those bribes to the ANC was then the leader of the Social Democratic Party, and he's now the Prime Minister of Sweden. So it goes to the top in Europe because of the influence of the armaments industry in Britain, Germany, Sweden, France, and so forth.
If it does, do you believe that those international companies will be shamed this time? I mean, the French arms company changing its name, you spoke about BAE, some fines, but a lot would argue, it could be argued that there hasn't been a lot of recourse beyond that.
Yes, there have been numerous attempts to squelch it, both in the United States, in Britain. BAE is now under examination because of its role in supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia that are being used for committing war crimes in Yemen. So the climate, I hope, is beginning to change from 20 years ago when arms companies and governments thought, oh, national security was beyond investigation by civil society and other parties in a constitutional democracy. I hope they're beginning to realize that we as citizens have a right to investigate the corruption that arms companies, and it's estimated that arms companies are responsible for about 40% of corruption internationally, even though economically their so-called contribution is less than 2% of GDP in most countries.
Mr. Crawford-Browne, a lot of people are relearning about the arms deal. It was something that had been set aside for years. Young people perhaps just starting to understand for the first time what happened. If you were speaking to them in a nutshell, what would you say? What was so dirty here?
It was sad that well, our transition from apartheid coincided with the end of the Cold War, and so European arms companies, and particularly BAE, were verging on bankruptcy. So the European governments and politicians flocked here to praise our democracy with one hand and peddle weapons with the other, and say that the more we spent on warships and warplanes, the more we would get back in offset benefits. That was a complete scam, and it's appalling that our government swallowed that scam and then blocked parliamentarians, even the Auditor General, from investigating it under the spurious excuse that it was commercially confidential. I think young people today have to be wide awake that politicians are notorious for changing their principles according to the circumstances. But I do believe that we have a lesson we can learn from this and go forward and begin to take us back to where we thought we were in 94, 96, when we really had a dream for a post-apartheid South Africa and a vision of a country that would address the issues of poverty and the legacies we faced from the apartheid era.
All right, thank you very much for your time this evening. From Cape Town, that was arms deal critic Terry Crawford-Browne. Bongani?